a new nurse on Surg has been there for 2 years and is really, really interested in cardiac. She's always been interested in cardiac. And as she sits in the break room, the clinical nurse specialist comes in and says, "Hey, we're going to be able to get you some time in the CCU." She taps the schedule with the back of her pen and says, "Should be able to do this in the next couple weeks. I know you've really been wanting to get some experience there, and we have a new onboarding program." But the days turn into weeks and the weeks turn into months, and she never seems to be scheduled for the CCU. So finally, one day she asks outright, "Hey, what happened with that?" And the clinical nurse specialist kind of blinks in surprise and says, "Oh, you know what? We're just way too short staffed right now. I'm sorry. I should have told you. I'm sure we'll get to it eventually." Welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph. This example of personal learning deferred is one of the most common breaches to something that we call the psychological contract. And that is when I either directly or indirectly make an offer to you of something that you can expect from me, and then I don't follow through on it. As I say this, I think so painfully of some times when I have implied or offered something to someone and then not followed through on it in a particular way. It stabs my heart in a unique manner when I am unable to follow through on things. And that's a good thing because people really hate it when there's an implied offer or an explicit offer and you do not follow through on it. This week, we're going to focus on getting you ready to survive psychological contract breaches, whether you're the one who's experienced the breach or you're the one who's caused the breach. This week starts a new chapter in our podcast focusing on other people and the thoughts we have that color our interactions. Put most simply, this chapter is thinking about other people. Starting with the psychological contract, we're going to move on from there to how do we position ourselves internally with respect to other people? What kind of inferences do we hold about them? We'll talk about how do we manage when standards that we hold aren't met, and yet we still have to interact with the other people. We're going to focus on what are we listening for? In both senses of that word, like what are the other people saying and how are we hearing it? But why the heck are we listening? And then we'll end the chapter with some thoughts about if we're holding, for example, generous inferences about people, and we're interested in the standards that we and they hold, what's a framework to help us understand what they are thinking and what they are feeling? And that's what we'll end this chapter with. I got interested in psychological contracts a long, long time ago, even though I never would have known that's what I was interested in. The first time I noticed this, I was a second grader in the Maharani Gayatri Devi School for Girls in Jaipur, India, where I had been deposited by my parents after traveling to India with them. And when I got to the school, I was shocked to find that my interesting ideas, my debating and discussing with the teacher, and my constantly shooting up my hand with an opinion to disagree with something that she might have said did not land well. And it took me a few reprimands and even being literally sent to the corner to learn that my view of what made up a good student, as I had been trained in the University of Chicago Lab School, founded by John Dewey, which was debate, discuss, share your opinion, have an idea, was not welcomed at the Maharani Gayatri Devi School for Girls, where their understanding of a good student was someone who listened to the teacher transfer the knowledge to them, complied with the teacher's requests and directives, and certainly did not disagree. This is an example of a psychological contract breach, probably on both of our sides. I remember Mrs. Fernandez, who I finally was able to befriend, being so frustrated with me for the first couple months of school until we both learned to accommodate to each other. Her psychological contract was, as I have just suggested, compliance, deferral, going along with and obeying her. Mine was something very different. And so she felt that I was not being a good student, and I thought she was certainly not being a good teacher. I owed her certain things, and she owed me certain things, and those two things were not agreeing. While this might be a somewhat charming story of a second grader gone awry, psychological contract breaches are actually extremely serious. And they started getting studied in depth, not for the first time, but in the most depth by Professor Denise Rousseau from Carnegie Mellon University. And I remember Denise telling me that she got interested in psychological contracts, a concept first invented by my hero, Chris Argyris, in 1960, because of an experience her dad had in the 1980s. So, up until the 1980s, most corporations in Western countries had essentially lifelong employment. And if you were a devoted employee, you did your work, you got a pension, and the organization took care of you. And as many of you may remember, if you're old enough, or you may have read if you're not, in the 1980s, we switched to much more contract work. The roots of the gig economy began, even though they didn't really flourish as plants until later. But this idea of lifelong employment was completely gone. And Denise Rousseau's dad, who had worked hard in the Pittsburgh steel mills before this shift, felt completely betrayed by his employers. And I think that caused Denise to get really interested in this. And she's published many articles on what is it. So the way I think about a psychological contract is that it's a reciprocal obligation. It's what I think you owe me and what I think I owe you. But the fascinating thing about psychological contracts, in my view, is you rarely know one exists until it's violated. Maybe you've had this experience where your partner made this beautiful dinner and served it, and the kids enjoyed it, and everybody's gone off to bed, and you did all the dishes and you cleaned up the entire kitchen. And in your mind, that means she's the one who should unload the dishwasher in the morning. But when you're about to go off to work and check, no, indeed, the dishwasher's not been emptied. So, this unconscious, sometimes unspoken agreement between us, which is if I do the dishes and wash them, you're going to unload the dishwasher, isn't recognized until I feel pissed off that now I'm stuck with emptying the dishwasher too. So, when something you assume is true and you assume this other person has the tacit agreement and then they don't follow through or they don't do what you think they should, it really brings up big feelings. Those judgments that we looked at in week one, those standards that we looked at, those big feelings that follow when standards aren't met, all of this comes to play in partnership with the other person when psychological contracts are breached. And what's so interesting here is this is another example of that phenomenon we've mentioned called the false consensus effect, which is I assume that you hold the same values I do or that you've made the same assumptions as I have. Sadly, all the other humans don't always think the same way I do.
Is that sadly, Jenny, or does that keep the world running?
That keeps the world running. Okay, so let's pivot to our workout of the week. We invite you this week to have a look out for thoughts that might be a little sign or symptom of a psychological contract breach. And that might be a thought like, I thought you were going to, or it's totally not fair that. And what we're trying to get at here is when are those moments when you've assumed that somebody else sees the world the same way you do with respect to a shared agreement? And the theme here is, did we actually agree to it? What I find very interesting as I do this particular practice is I start recognizing a different class of assumptions that I hold. So, in that spirit, just do that practice of mental noting that we introduced you to. Huh, I'm saying it's not fair that. Huh, I thought you were going to. There must be a psychological contract I have here with you that you don't know about. The other thing you could do is start noticing if there are any patterns into which these fall, or certain things that are coming up regarding that's not fair, or I thought you were going to. So tell us what you find. We'd love to hear what kinds of psychological contracts you are holding with other people that they may or may not recognize they're holding with you. So tell us what you found. I'm very curious now. What are the psychological contracts that seem to be floating around in your life?
The only other one I could think of was, I thought you were gonna get curious now.
That could be a cute outtake, James.
Yeah.